Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 2, the Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 10, Text 26. Nirabhidhyattasishnovai Prajan Andhamritartinan Upasta asit kamanam priyam tad ubhayasrayam. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Purport. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back home, back to Godhead, and therefore generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of a living entity. In forms of life other than the human be suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth only to one at a time. So one should always remember that the genitals, sexual pleasure, and the woman and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there, even in the body of the dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. Text 27. Utsish krushor datum halam nirhabidhyat vaigudam tatapayus tato mitra utsarga ubhayasraya. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. The sense organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. Purport. Even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled, so how can the living entity claim to be independent? Text 28. Asishripshur purha purya nabidvaram apanata tatrapanas tato mrityu prataktvam ubhayasrayam. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel, and the air of departure and death were combinedly created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. Purport. The prana vayu continues the life, and the
Dandavat.
prana vayu stops the living force. Dandavat pranam, Dr. Sahu. Both the vibrations are generated from the abdominal hole, the navel. This navel is the joint from one body to another. Lord Brahma was born of the abdominal hole of Garbhodaksha Vishnu as a separate body, and the same principle is followed even in the birth of any ordinary body. The body of the child develops from the body of the mother, and when the child is separated from the body of the mother, it is separated by cutting the navel joint. And that is the way the Supreme Lord manifested himself as separated many. The living entities and therefore are therefore separated parts, and thus they have no independence. Text 29. Arichor anna prananam asan kukshantra nadaya dadya samudras chatayos tushti pustis tad ashraye. When there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines and also the arteries became manifested. The rivers and the seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. The controlling deity, purport. The controlling deities of the intestines are the rivers, and those of the arteries the seas. Fulfillment of the belly with food and drink is the cause of sustenance, and the metabolism of the food and drink replaces the waste of the bodily energies. Therefore, the body's health is dependent on healthy actions of the intestines and the arteries. The rivers and the seas, being the controlling deities of the two, keep the intestines and the arteries in healthy order. Text 30. Nidhyasur atmam atmamhayam sridhayam nirabhidyata ato manas chandra iti shankalpa kama evacha. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. Purport. The heart of every living entity is the seat of the Supersoul, Paramatma, a plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. The living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them, and the requisite material body is offered to each and every one of them by material energy under the direction of the Supersoul. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita 9.10. When, therefore, the Supersoul is situated in the heart of the conditioned soul, the requisite mind is manifested in the conditioned soul, and he becomes conscious of his occupation as one is conscious of his duty after waking from slumber. Therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the Supersoul sits in his heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, moon, and the living entity develops, the controlling deity, moon, and then the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling, and willing, all take place. The activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. Text 31. Svakcharma mamsa rudhira medo majasti dattava bhumyaptejo maya sapta pranovyom bambu ayubi. The 7 elements of the body, namely the thin layer on the skin itself, the flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and bone, are all made of earth, water, fire, whereas the life breath is produced by the sky, water, and air. Purport. The construction of the whole material world is prominently made by three elements, namely earth, water, and fire. But the living force is produced by the sky, air, and water. So water is the common element in both the gross and subtle forms of all material creation. And it should be noted herewith that due to necessity, water being most prominent in the material creation is the principal element of all five. This material body is thus an embodiment of the five elements, and the gross manifestation is perceived because of three, namely earth, water, and fire. Sensations of touch are perceived due to the thin layer on the skin, and bone is as good as hard stone. The breathing air of life is produced of sky, air, and water, and therefore open air, regular bath, and ample space in which to live are favorable for healthy vitality. Fresh produce from the earth, like grains and vegetables, as well as water and heat, is good for the upkeep of the gross body. Text 32. Gunatmakan indriyani bhutari prabhava guna manasarva vikaratma buddhir vijnana rupini. The sense organs are attached to the modes of material nature, and the modes of material nature are products of the false ego. The mind is subjected to all kinds of material experiences, happiness and distress, and the intelligence is the feature of the mind's deliberation. Purport. Illusioned by the material nature, the living entity identifies with false ego. More clearly, when the living entity is entrapped by the material body, he at once identifies with the bodily relationships, forgetting his own identity as spirit soul. This false ego associates with different modes of material nature, and thus the senses become attached to the modes of material nature. Mind is the instrument for feeling different material experiences, but intelligence is deliberative and can change everything for the better. The intelligent person, therefore, can attain salvation from the illusion of material existence by proper use of intelligence. An intelligent person can detect the awkward position of material existence and thus begin to inquire as to what he is, why he is subjected to different kinds of miseries, and how to get rid of all miseries. And thus, by good association, an advanced intelligent person can turn towards the better life of self-realization. It is advised, therefore, that an intelligent person associate with the great sages and saints who are on the path of salvation. By such association, one can receive instructions which are able to slacken the conditioned soul's attachment for matter. And thus the intelligent man gradually gets rid of the illusion of matter and false ego, and is promoted to the real life of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Text 33. Etad bhagavato rupam stulam te vyartam maya mayadibis shavaranar astabir bahir avritam. Thus, by all this, the external feature of the personality of Godhead is covered by gross forms, such as those of planets, which were explained to you by me. Purport. As explained in Bhagavad Gita 7.4, the separated material energy of the personality of Godhead is covered by 8 kinds of material coverings: earth, water, fire, air, sky, mind, intelligence, and false ego. All these are emanations from the personality of Godhead as his external energy. These coverings are just like the covering of clouds for the sun. The cloud is a creation of the sun, yet it actually covers the eyes so that one cannot see the sun. The sun cannot be covered by the clouds. The cloud can at utmost extend a few hundred of miles in the sky, but the sun is far greater than millions of miles. So a 100-mile covering is not competent to cover millions of miles. Therefore, one of the various energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot, of course, cover the Lord. But these coverings are created by him to cover the eyes of the conditioned souls who want to lord it over the material nature. Actually, the conditioned souls are covered by the illusory creative cloud of matter, and the Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to their eyes. Because they have no eyes of transcendental vision and because they cannot see the personality of Godhead, they therefore deny the existence of the Lord and the transcendental form of the Lord. The covering of the gigantic material feature is accepted by such men with a poor fund of knowledge, and how this is so is explained in the following verse. Text 34. Atha param sukshmatamam evyaktam nirvisheshanam anadi madhya nidhanam nityam van manasa param. Therefore, beyond this gross manifestation is a transcendental manifestation, finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Therefore, it is beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation, and it is distinct from the material conception. The gross external body, this is the purport now, the gross external body of the Supreme is manifested at certain intervals, and thus the external feature or form of all Supreme Personality of Godhead is not the eternal form of the Lord, which has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Anything which has a beginning, interim, and end is called material. The material world is begun from the Lord, and thus the form of the Lord, before the beginning of the material creation, is certainly transcendental to the finest, or the finer material conception. The ether in the material world is considered to be the finest. Finer than the ether is mind, intelligence, and false ego. But all 8 of the outward coverings are explained as outer coverings of the absolute truth. The absolute truth is therefore beyond the expression and speculation of the material conception. He is certainly transcendental to all material conceptions. This is called nirvisheshanam. One should not, however, misunderstand nirvisheshanam as being without any transcendental qualifications. Visheshanam means qualities. Therefore, nir added to it means he has no material qualities or variegatedness. This nullifying expression is described in 4 transcendental qualifications, namely unmanifested, transcendental, eternal, and beyond the conception of mind or word. Beyond the limits of words means negation of material conception. Unless one is transcendentally situated, it is not possible to know the transcendental form of the Lord. Thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 35 on Friday. Are there any comments from any of the devotees, assembled devotees?
Namaste, Dandavat, Pranam.
Dhanyavad, Dr. Sinu.
Can you can you tell me something on Panchamahabhut, the creation part of the material elements which you were talking like earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and its significance? Sometimes it is said that the body is a constituent of 5 material elements, and when the death comes, that all these elements, earthly element goes to earth, fiery elements goes to fire, watery elements goes to water, and self, which is eternal, and it moves from one body to other body. So how do you understand these things? Transmigration of the soul as it is there in Hindu philosophy. Like even also in Bhakti Vedanta, there is a concept of Videha Mukti and Jivan Mukti. And how do you relate to all these things, that material components, whether within material components there is a spiritual elements are there or not? So like
So Bhagavad Gita tells us very directly something we can empirically affirm. We don't have to just have faith in it. We can actually see it with reason. Krishna says, Dehinosmin yata dehe kumaram yovanam jara tata dehantaras praptir dhiras tatra namuyate. So he says, just as in our current life, we are moving from one body to the next, from being a baby to being youthful, to being an adolescent, an adult, into old age. Similarly, at death, we also attain another body. So we can see very straightforward if we look at pictures of ourselves as a baby, right? We're 2 feet long, very chubby. We might even have birthmarks that we don't currently have any longer. And then as a child, we're more slender, maybe very thin. The birthmarks are gone. Then as an adult, right? So it's the body itself is constantly changing in this lifetime. Even the scientists are saying every 7 years on a cellular level, the body is renewing itself, right? The body is constantly undergoing what is it? The metabolic processes, right? Anabolism, catabolism, and metabolism is being teared down, cell death, or the molecules are leaving with the cells that are dying. New molecules are being generated when new cells are being born through mitosis, right? So there's constant being born or dying, and then mitosis, the maintenance, the maintaining of this living form through this fluctuation of dying and being born, dying and being born, dying and being born on a cellular level. So the body is constantly changing, not only from one lifetime to the next, but throughout our current lifetime, the body is changing. So this is a very direct way we can understand that although the elements of the body are changing constantly, still we are the same person. Even though we recognize our childhood body is different from our current body, still it was us who was a child. We have those memories, we have those experiences, right? That was us in a different body. So it's not so far-fetched to understand that after this body perishes, that we will still be there having experiences, having memories, even if we don't remember a previous lifetime. Some people can't remember something that happened to them 10 years ago, So what to speak of lifetimes ago or last lifetime, So it's not such a far-fetched conception, but more specifically about the Mahabhutas you were asking. It's the gross energy, it's gross material energy. There's gross and subtle material energy, and it's not really so important to know about that on the spiritual level. It's more important to understand about the spirit, soul, and its relation to the Supreme Spirit and the actual process of bhakti, and then actually engaging in that through service, practically understanding what is service, how can we engage in it, and then actually taking that upon ourselves, using our freedom to engage in those activities. That is the more important thing to worry about. But, as far as sometimes maintaining the health of the body, in Ayurveda, the Mahabhutas are important, of course, because Ayurveda is concerned with our Prakriti, Pitta, Kapha, and Pitta, Kapha, and Vata. Right. So once you understand this body's particular nature, is it Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, then your diet can be specifically aligned with that kind of body constitution. Your daily habits of exercise and nutrition and sleeping and all that are supposed to be aligned with your body's constitution. But, people can get carried away with worrying about that and not doing anything for devotional life. So more important to first, focus on what is devotion, how can we actually engage in that and practice with that. But as far as health is concerned, even Srila Shanta Maharaj and Srila Muni Maharaj, they are aware of the Ayurveda and sometimes using those things when the state of the body may hinder service, because that's the one thing. If our health is poor and it's starting to hurt our service, then that's not good. Then we have to focus, okay, we should become healthy This way our service can go very flawlessly. So in that way, then both Shanta Maharaj and Muni Maharaj are aware of some Ayurvedic principles, and they know how to apply those principles to keep their body in a healthy state, so it's good to know about the Mahabhutas and Ayurveda in that kind of way. But essentially that's the material energy. So
see, the point is that I got your point, but I feel sometimes the body also plays a very vital role. And when we talk about one is that we talk about the individual body, like there are 3 types of bodies. We talk about subtle body, gross body, and causal body. And what my point is that when we talk about Mahabhuta, like Pancha Mahabhuta, it's not certainly the ordinary composition we are making here. And when we are making a Maha, the word Maha is a kind of, so is it something which stands for a universal strength, or something which is, these elements are not just the kind of material entity, but a kind of relating to Rita or the Dharma. They are the source of the energy, and that is the reason, that could be the reason why we talk about these elements as Mahabhuta, not just ordinary elements. You got what I'm trying to say?
yeah, they are ordinary elements, though. It's just material energy. It's called Mahabhutas and Sankhya, right? In Bhakti, in Bhagavad Vedanta, there's not so much emphasis on Mahabhutas, right? We're concerned with Mahavishnu. But
Okay.
in Sankhya philosophy, they call Mahabhutas, but it's just material energy. There's nothing transcendental about it at all, aside from the fact that it's Bahiranga Shakti. It's the external energy of the Lord. So when we are remembering that the Mahabhutas are Bahiranga Shakti, and then that's bringing us back to Vishnu Smaranam, then that's the only transcendental thing about it. Otherwise, it's very mundane, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai.
Raj ki jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nishringapali Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Ganga Mai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Giri Govardhan, Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai. Sham Kund, Radha Kund Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi, Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Jai Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Jai Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai. Jai Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai. Jai Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt Ki Jai. Sama Bhaktiveda Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the worldwide devotees Ki Jai. Jai Srimati Uma Devi Dasi Ki Jai. Jai Dr. Sahu Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Pramanandi. Hari 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 Bol. Hare Krishna.
Jai Maharaj ki jai.
Hare Krishna.